So what is account abstraction and why is everyone talking about it? Please welcome our next speaker, Teman, Product Manager and Developer Relations at the Ethereum Foundation. He'll be giving us a deep dive into ERC-4337. His primary focus at the Ethereum Foundation is on the account abstraction team. So I can't think of a more perfect speaker for this topic. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Hey everyone, very happy to be here. So this talk is going to be on account abstraction in general and ERC-4337, which some of you may have heard of. So first a little bit about myself. I've been in the space quite a while, back since 2013. In 2018, I founded Portis, a Web3 provider SDK that was acquired by Shapeshift in 2020. And in 2023, I joined the Ethereum Foundation to work on ERC-4337, which we will learn about very quickly. I also live in Tel Aviv, and feel free to follow us on Twitter or me if you want to. So a lot of you probably heard about account abstraction, and it's a pretty difficult name. It's kind of hard to understand what it means, why, what are we abstracting exactly. So EOA wallets you are probably very familiar with. Those are, if you have MetaMask or if you have a Bitcoin wallet, it's pretty much similar. The whole concept of an EOA wallet is that the private key and the public key are linked together inherently, and your address is derived from the public key. But when you create a wallet, and this is something that is usually very surprising to people, you don't tell anyone that you created a wallet, right? Because there's just so many possibilities. You just pick a random private public key, and it's almost 100% that no one else has that same key. So it's very cheap to create wallets. It's very easy. You just raffle that private public key pair, and the network inherently, and I'm talking about Ethereum right now, knows how to work with that public private key pair. Smart contract wallets, on the other hand, are much more sophisticated, but also more complex, meaning that you can do more fancy stuff with them, but on the other hand, they are a bit more expensive and also do have a problem when we're talking about existing smart contract wallets around centralization, mostly about the fact that the network still only accepts transactions that originate from EOAs. So an EOA wallet somewhere along the line, if we're creating this meta transaction that we're sending to the wallet, someone still needs to initiate that transaction from an EOA account. And we will talk about how we get around that with ERC-4337, around that centralization issue. Because, well, we don't like centralization. So to dive a little bit deeper about, the challenges that we have around EOAs. And they have some security issues, and when you have bad security, it's also bad UX, right? It's like people writing Post-its with their passwords. People will find ways to get around bad security, bad UX, by introducing bad security. So one of the major issues that everybody's very, very familiar with is the problem that you have just one key, right? It's like one key to rule them all. If you lose it, then all your money's gone. If you make too many copies, someone can get a hold of it, all your money's gone. In Ethereum specifically, one of the challenges is that there's no, if you think your Bitcoin wallet is compromised, then what you can do is just, okay, it's going to cost me some money. I'm going to move everything to a new wallet. I'm good. In Ethereum, a lot of other contracts would be aware of the address of the EOA that you had, and sometimes it's difficult, and also sometimes it's impossible to update that address to something else. So by changing your wallet, you're losing your reputation on some contract, your permissions somewhere else, maybe access to some NFTs, whatever it is, it's not always easy to migrate. And yeah, no recovery. With Portis, one of the issues we had is that we were self-custodial. We gave people the option to store the encrypted key on our server, but if they lost their password and didn't write down their seed phrase, we were just like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. That's the thing with self-custody. So recovery is a big problem with EOA wallets. And another big issue that we have is, in Web 2, we have a lot of existing systems in place to managing control. You don't want one key to do everything. You want one key to do this, another key to do that, different transactions, different permissions, and it's a problem that with EOAs, it's just like one key does it all, and that's not really good when you're considering exactly what was mentioned in the previous conversation by Fireblocks, is that you want to have this granular control for different people, different permissions. Gas payment is another big pain point, because when you want to create a transaction, the way Ethereum is architectured is that the sending wallet needs to have some Ethereum inside that wallet to send a transaction. There's no other way to do that, which means that you need to tell that person to go and send Ethereum into that wallet from some other wallet. And that, from an onboarding perspective, that's a nightmare. But there's also a privacy issue here. Imagine I just want to claim an NFT and I need to send Ethereum into that wallet, and that Ethereum originated from something that was probably KYC'd. So in effect, I will be doxing myself. And that can sometimes be a problem in specific areas of the world or just in general. And finally, the apps themselves have some problems with the rigidity of how EOAs work. You can't batch transactions together. You can't automate stuff. I always have to manually sign the transaction. If I want my wallet to listen to an event and sign that transaction when it happens, that means I need to set up like my own service and put that private key in that service, or relinquish control of my private key to some external service that do it for me, but then I'm missing out on the whole self-custodial element here. And no, it's not decentralized, there's an issue of trust, etc. So EOAs, and everybody who's used an EOA wallet knows they're difficult. So what do we get with smart contract wallets? I would say that the three main things that we are abstracting here and adding power is around validation, execution, and gas payment. Validation, I would break it down into two things, which is authorization and authentication. Now, I know it sounds the same, but there's a slight difference. So authorization is my key valid? Is it a legit key? Like, can you verify the signature and say, yeah, that's the key. Whoever signed this message owns the relevant private key. That's the authorization. The authentication, sorry, that's the authentication. Authorization is what can that key do? Right now with EOA, there's only one type of authorization, one type of authentication, that's it. Now we can have, for the same account, multiple keys with multiple different authorization, authentications, etc. So I can use just, my Google account for basic transactions. I can add another 2FA signature for more serious transaction. I can use MPC, I can use multisig, I can do whatever I want, just like we're used from Web 2, right? When you have access control layers. So, and everything is done on chain, which is a big part here. We're not trusting any centralized service to enforce those rules. This is done by the lovely global computer called Ethereum. Execution is also something that we gain some value around batching and automation. So those two problems I mentioned before, that's something that we can now do in the smart contract, and we can add those capabilities. And finally, gas payment. So, funny story, when we started Portis back in 2018, we gave each new user $1 for free. We did some SMS verification in the beginning. We gave it out to everybody. Then we started to have to kind of block certain countries and then only allow specific countries, and then at some point we turned it off completely because people were abusing it even from countries like the UK or whatever. But we wanted to prove a point. We wanted to prove that if we get the gas out of, we take that problem off the table, and $1 back then was enough for like 3-4 transactions, then we can show that the apps can be easy for users. This was not a scalable thing. This was just a proof of concept. But with paymasters, which is part of the ERC-4337, someone else can pay the gas. So that creates a much, much, much smoother experience for our users. A little bit of a kind of a side note, but it's important to understand why ERC-4337 was done the way it is. So not a lot of people know the difference between EAP and ERC. And so to kind of keep it simple, EAPs are what you would call breaking changes. If it's the merge, if it's EAP 1559, which was the one around gas fees, where you burn some of the gas fees, those are changes that once they've been approved and implemented and run for a long time, at some point we're like, okay, that's it. This is how we move forward. You're either with us or not with us. Case in point, Ethereum Classic. This is a breaking change fork. ERCs are more of a recommendation, or I would say a standard around a feature. For example, ERC-20. There's a lot of value for everybody to agree on the same standard for a token. That means we can enjoy this interoperability and a lot of value from everybody talking in the same language. But if you don't want to use ERC-20, that's fine. The network would continue as is. It's not something that's enforced. And ERC-4337 is an ERC, and I will explain soon why. So the concept of account abstraction has been around for quite a bit. Vitalik even talked about it early on as 2015, and he even said that he regrets not having it as part of the core protocol, but they had to release quickly, and everybody who has ever worked on a project can understand that conflict where you want to add something else to the release, but you got to release because people are pressuring you to start doing that. So it was never introduced natively on-chain, and it was introduced as an ERC. And the reason we introduced it as an ERC, and that's part of the cleverness around that, is that when you're talking about a security improvement or a performance improvement, like scalability, it's very easy to point at the bottom line and say, look, if we implement this, gas fees will remain stable, and we can show that. Or if we implement this, we can do 10 times more transactions, etc. Account abstraction is a little fuzzier than that. It's more about user experience. It's about making things, better UX means also better security, but it's not such a hard line between the two. So by introducing this as an ERC, we are able to demonstrate the value to everybody, and hopefully at some point, and that's the plan, it will become enshrined as a native thing on the network. But we started off as an ERC, and we'll explain how we do that very soon. So what do we solve with ERC-4337? So there's everything I mentioned around account abstraction. We have the authentication and authorization, solving the gas payment with paymasters, and the execution as well. You can start having more sophisticated logic in your contracts, in your accounts, that allow you to have automated things happen, have batching of transactions, which reduce gas fees, etc. What's important around ERC-4337 as opposed to centralized account abstraction wallet is that it's completely decentralized, which means that there's no censorship, it's resistant to DOS, all the things that we kind of love blockchain for. It also means that the infrastructure is very robust. So it was very important to us to make sure that there's plenty of clients that are working on creating bundlers, and I'll explain what bundlers are in a minute, but think of them just like we have nodes, like Geth, for instance, or Nethermind. So we also need bundlers to have ERC-4337 working, And we made sure to promote as many bundlers out there. So there's currently around 6 or 7 different implementations in different languages. And it just means that everything is more robust. If there's a bug in one implementation, we have the others to fall back onto. And finally, and I mentioned this, no protocol change. And this means that any VM chain can just start using it right away without having to convince the entire community to, accept this change. And it also means that we can move forward very quickly, demonstrate the value, and eventually turn this into something which is natively implemented on network. So I mentioned that we need bundlers, and this is one of the main components of ERC-4337. And the way that account abstraction with ERC-4337 works is that we have something called a user operation. Now, user operations are very similar to what you know as transactions, just with a little bit more bells and whistles on top. Those user operations are now sent to a user operation mempool, or alternative mempool, as it's called in the EIP. It's very similar to the mempool that we know from Ethereum, but that mempool gets looked at by bundlers. Bundlers take those user operations, verify that they are valid, and then they don't submit it to they create this huge, this big transaction, like a regular transaction composed of everything in the user operation, and then they don't submit it to the mempool. This is a common misunderstanding. They need to be actually block builders themselves, and they propose a new block with that big transaction as part of that block. The reason being is otherwise they could get front run, etc. So bundlers have to either be block builders themselves or work very closely with block builders to make sure that they can work according to the protocol. The entry point contract is something which is a singleton contract which is deployed on every network, and it acts, think of it like a traffic cop. Everything goes through it, and there's multiple reasons why we need that. One of them is to just, we don't want every wallet re-implementing a lot of the core logic. It creates a problem of trust. Everybody kind of has to retrust every new wallet. It creates a lot of burden on the wallet providers that need to build it themselves. And there's also technical reasons why we want to do that, which I can't, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into during this conversation. The account contract is the user's account, and this is something that is implemented differently by every wallet. So this is where you have your logic on how you want to validate your signatures, have account recovery, whatever logic that wallet decided their users should have, that would be implemented in the account contract. And what we're seeing happening recently is that those wallets are actually being turned into a lot more modular contracts, meaning you have your basic smart contract wallet, but it's built in a way that allows plugins to kind of hook into it. So you can have like a plugin for account recovery this way, you can have a plugin for some different type of signatures, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Paymasters are what allows third parties to pay the gas fees. And those third parties can be anyone. They can be the dApps. They can be Visa. Visa recently released an article. They've been playing around with paymasters, and it's a very interesting field for them to enter because they know how to do the KYC. Just imagine the following use case, that a user just doesn't even have to know about blockchain, because the smart contract wallet will have the key validation be your Google account, just to start you off, something simple. You don't even know it's blockchain. You give your Visa card to Visa, which you know and trust, so they handle the gas fees. Whenever you sign a transaction, they pay the gas fees behind the scenes, and then at the end of the month, they charge your Visa card. So we created a flow for a user where they don't even know it's blockchain, but it is, because we added all those different components which allow the experience to be very, very smooth for the user. User operation, I mentioned, that's the basic the new transaction that you have. And the mempool, this is basically the secret sauce that allows this to exist as an ERC. By creating this alternative or user op mempool, we can create this new layer, this additional layer, where those meta transactions exist and then eventually get added to the main chain where regular transactions are, made permanent, so to speak. If anyone wants to dive a little deeper and are more interested in the technical elements, this is a workshop that we recently gave in Tokyo, where we demonstrate how this can actually be used by developers, and it's for people who really want to get into the more, let's say, technical innards of everything, go under the hood. So on March, ERC-4337 was deployed to mainnet, so it's live. You can use it today. You could have started using it 2 months ago. It's been audited by OpenZeppelin, and it's on a lot of different chains. I won't list all of them, but pretty much all of them. If it's Optimism, Arbitrum, Avalanche, Polygon, Gnosis chain. I'm probably forgetting a few. And also we're starting to see it on rollups as well, like ZK Sync, etc. There's a very robust bundler infrastructure that you can use, so you don't have to. You can use a lot of different components to start playing around with today. We even built something called Trampoline, which is an ERC-4337 wallet. It looks like MetaMask. We're actually using this MetaMask React boilerplate that exists out there, but it's more meant for developers and hackathons so they can just start playing around with the capabilities of account abstracted wallets right away. There's a lot of wallets also that have adopted ERC-4337 and are seeing the value behind it. And we just closed a grant round by the Ethereum Foundation to add a lot of open source projects to the ecosystem that help. For instance, in the previous round, we sponsored like an Etherscan, but for account abstracted for ERC-4337 transactions, because they're a little bit more sophisticated. Think of it like transactions that are wrapped with additional data, and when everything is submitted on-chain, unfolding it to display the transaction history and what actually happened takes a bit more of sophistication, so we needed a project that does exactly that, because as a developer, as you're working on your project, you need something like Etherscan. Oh, I want to see my transaction has been submitted on chain and see all the different details. So we realized the importance of having something like that. So what's next? So as I mentioned, ZK Rollup started offering native account abstraction, which reduces gas fees significantly. And there's a lot of wallets that have emerged, and in general, we're seeing this getting adopted very strongly by the community, because I think everybody understands the need and the fact that we will never be able to get to 1 billion users and actually have mainstream adoption until we are, making blockchain easier for users. Users shouldn't care about blockchain. This should be something that's transparent to them. The ultimate goal is that no more EOAs, account abstraction is natively on-chain, and we even allow conversion of existing EOAs into smart contract wallets. It's a little tricky. There's some inherent riskiness in it, because if you already had an EOA, what happens if a new chain comes along, that EOA, that private public key pair would be valid there, so how does that work exactly? So a lot of people are thinking on how we solve those challenges, but I believe that eventually, 5 years from now, something like that, EOAs would be considered something that, nobody actually uses EOAs, because it will just be perceived as something that is way too risky to use, too much of a hammer in a world where you sometimes need to be more fine-tuned. So there will be old EOAs, but at some point people will just stop onboarding with EOAs at all. So we're going for 1 billion users, and the great thing is, and when I was working on Portis, we always kind of talked about the balance between security and usability. And with ERC-4337, it appears like we're being able to gain the best of both worlds, both security and usability, but almost just as importantly, also while maintaining decentralization, which is a big part of it. You're welcome to follow us. We recently launched an official website, so please go ahead and visit it. And check us out on Twitter. We release all the latest news there. And that's it. Thank you very much.